I'm walking along, talking. But what if I just stopped? No words, no sound. Just silence. Many of us can't stand silence. Even now you may have felt a little bit uneasy with the pause, perhaps a desire to skip over it. Who's this guy wasting my time? But silence, it seems to me, and so many of the great voices of the past, is precisely where we meet what is real. It's in the silence that we're able to meet with what is beyond us. And you know, given the interest in my last video, I thought I'd delve more into places where God is very visible in our lives. In this video, I want to talk about not only the merits of silence, but of ways of actively reaching it. And I'm coming with you on this. I'm just sharing what I've discovered. It's worth asking in our culture today whether silence isn't just about the absence of something, but paradoxically is something. What if it's a doorway to clarity in life, as well as to being present in the moment? What if it's the doorway ultimately to God Himself? So how do we find silence in a noisy world? What methods work and what paths could we take? In this short video, let's walk, let's reflect, and perhaps along the way we'll discover the way to finding what for so many of us seems out of reach. And I'm not going to suggest it's about simply adding times to be silent to the diary, another to do on the to-do list, but something deeper, something connected to practices and to story, to awakening this sense of wonder in our own lives. So back when I had more of a social life, before my kids were born, I'd go out to restaurants and bars a fair bit, and sitting opposite friends or my now wife, anytime someone got up and I was alone for barely 5 minutes, my hand would automatically slip into my pocket and pull out my phone with such ease and precision, almost like a reflex, like Clint Eastwood drawing a pistol, entirely subconscious. And I bet I'm not alone there. Eventually, and I don't quite remember when, but I started to consciously push back against this instinct, this habit which we can see all around us. And the phone is obviously everywhere. So much so that you'll see friends or even a couple both on their phones sat at dinner. Could you imagine if they were both reading a book or a magazine out in a bar? It'd be weird, but there it is. Okay, so why do I say this? Why do I state the obvious? Well, aside from the fact that phones are highly addictive and social media is designed in that way, aside from that nicotine-like pull, it seems to me that this culture of constant scrolling wouldn't have even been possible if we weren't already afraid of silence and of stillness. Again, I can't help but think of Aldous Huxley's novel Brave New World, where music accompanies every aspect of life, lest the people see the emptiness underneath. And the philosopher Roger Scruton once bemoaned music playing in supermarkets, and went so far as to say that the distraction of such, let's be honest, a kind of noise pollution is as destructive as inhaling secondhand smoke in public places. And he was pointing to the public smoking ban. Obviously, it was a controversial point to many, but Scruton was touching on something deeper, exposing a blind spot in the purely materialist worldview, that health isn't just about the lungs or the liver, but about the soul too. Spiritual well-being matters, and this fact is almost entirely neglected in Western societies today. And do I really need to listen to Rick Astley when I'm buying dishwasher tablets at 9 a.m? Again, we only accept it because many modern people dislike silence and stillness. St. Isaac the Syrian wrote, "True wisdom is gazing at God. And gazing at God is silence of the thoughts." But if you're watching this video, you likely know that. We've all likely heard these quotes about the importance of silence, quotes from the saints on its importance. And I want to come back to them in a moment because I think that the saints actually have the answer. In 1 Kings, Elijah famously hears God in the silence. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. So it was when Elijah heard it that he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood in the entrance of a cave. Suddenly a voice came to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And this is often the first thing quoted when you hear a monk or a nun promoting silence and silent living, the still small voice. Now, the skeptic will doubtlessly question this hearing of a voice talking back. In my experience, some people hear such things, and some people don't. More often than not, it's more subtle, isn't it? It can be the voice of the conscience, as John Henry Newman said. The conscience is the aboriginal vicar of Christ. So all of this to say, silence isn't emptiness or twiddling our thumbs whilst we're waiting for the next thing, is it? Silence itself is something. It's the space where we can finally hear that inner whisper, the conscience or the whisper of the Holy Spirit. Silence is where we hear what has the power to transform us. It's also where we can finally see clearly who we are or who we're becoming. And just listen to that. There's nothing. It's great. And so today we have to be more intentional about finding that space, don't we? That silence in a world that's been built upon speed and volume. So if you're still with me, and maybe you've been thinking about this too, let's look at some of our options. If you can't mute the noise of the world around you, then we can look at what the church, let's say the tools that the universal church has provided us with. From the earliest monastic traditions, silence has been paired with prayer to steady the mind and the soul. The prayer rope and the Holy Rosary are the two most famous examples here for us to find that stillness. And these practices are obviously invaluable means of receiving grace, just as ultimately in the Mass or the Divine Liturgy, when heaven touches the earth in the sacred meal of the Eucharist, what is a foretaste of the heavenly Jerusalem. But even as we return from the sanctuary to the world, I think, and this is just my opinion, that we still live in a tension. Let's be honest, the reality of daily life, with the noise, the distractions, and often the chaos, can feel more like Babylon than anything else. There's a certain distance from modern living to that peace, isn't there? Now, I'm not for a second playing down the rosary or the prayer rope, far from it. But I want to suggest that, like Elijah, most of us need places like that cave where there is silence. Silence that gives our souls space. More than Elijah, in the Gospels, Christ himself seeks moments of silence and solitude, away from it all. Perhaps that's why those who seek God so deeply usually situate their lives in places where silence isn't a stranger. The monastery out in the hills, amongst the trees, where the world itself is still and seems to almost be listening back. We're ultimately connected to the natural world, aren't we? We're part of this reality all around us. But when we stop and look around, we see that these trees grow in silence. The world moves, changes and forms without making much of a fuss. Now, of course, we need to communicate and interact with each other. All of that is good. But it's no wonder that today I hear people say just how much they find God out in the natural world. So I'll lay my cards out. I do think that living in a big city makes life very difficult, particularly for the spiritual life. So much so that with my wife, I deliberately decided to leave the city that I'd spent the first 25 years of my life living in. Got a bit of a journey, and then there's something very cool that I want to show you. But what if you can't just escape the city? Am I suggesting a trip to the countryside every other weekend to go outside, like Mum and Dad used to say? Am I saying that? Well, yes and no. At least that's not how I want to present it. So just hang on a second and then hear me out. You may be someone who loves the outdoors. You like to hike or fish. You have ways to get there already. And if you do, then what I'm about to suggest probably won't be so relevant to you. Though it could transform your already existing hobby. It could sanctify your pastime, as it were. Because over time, one thing that's helped me, which I didn't even realize I was doing to get outdoors, is a kind of informal pilgrimage. Informal, frequent pilgrimage to the outdoors. One of the great things about living in the English countryside is that you're never too far away from a wonderful old church. And this one was built in the 11th century. Its bricks are soaked with prayer, dating back to the years just before the Norman conquest. So let's go inside. There are 4 major Anglo-Saxon saints that are particularly venerated here in the north of England, saints that I often talk about on this channel. In fact, I'm currently developing another short film based on one of them. All 4 saints that I'm referring to, Cuthbert, Aidan, Oswald and Hilda, are deeply connected to the natural world. And you might say, well, of course, medieval people didn't live in the cities, so of course that's the case. And you'd be right, but their closeness to nature goes beyond historical context. For Cuthbert and Aidan especially, the sea, the hills, the caves, and that ascetic simplicity weren't just settings, but were spiritually instructive. Their faith was shaped by these wild places where solitude invited a deeper encounter with God. So much so that the folk memory of that encounter with the land now speaks back. In the story of St. Hilda, the saint in my upcoming short film, the cliffs of Whitby and the fossils embedded within them are deeply intertwined with the legend of snakes slithering across the moors, snakes that Hilda is said to have turned into stone through prayer. Interestingly, in the 19th century, after the upheavals of the English Reformation and the Industrial Revolution, it was the Victorians who helped revive attention and devotion to these saints. It was as though after a season of fragmentation, of breakdown and of noise, people longed again for rootedness and for the rustic holiness that these saints embodied. You'll literally be tripping over references to these saints in Victorian and early 20th century windows. This one's a little bit later. So back to this point about silence, back to this point about nature. Here's what I want to suggest, and here's what worked for me. And I have an idea for you guys in North America too, so stick around for that. But if you live in Britain or Europe and haven't done this already, do some searching and find a great Christian man or woman who lived not far from you. Find a great saint, a great story. It's almost impossible not to find one, even if you're a 1 or 2 hour drive away from where they lived. That's what happened to me with these figures almost in my back garden. Figures who've impressed themselves onto the landscape, so much so that they're in the street and town names. Their lives have shaped our landscapes, and they can shape us too. Find one of these holy people from that other age. Check out our map of enchantment over on the site. We've made it for free. I'll put a link in the description. We're shaped by what we attend to, because adding go for a walk to the countryside probably isn't going to cut it if you have a busy schedule, a busy life, unless you already have an outdoor hobby. It seems to me that's the modern approach. Add another activity, check a box, improve my well-being. It can work, but it can be a little bit rootless. It might work for a season, but it doesn't really bind us to anything deeper. What actually works, what has worked for me, is acting, moving within a story. We're moved by meaning. Story is organic. It will get a hold of you. A diary is a lot of things, but it's certainly not organic. When we develop a connection with a saint, we're not just learning about them, you're stepping into a story. And through that, our own actions begin to take shape. And this is why wherever Christianity truly took root, it did so not just through abstract propositions, but through the concrete witness of holy men and women. In pagan lands like this one, the faith was quite literally built on the human foundations of those who spread the faith, the saints. Their lives are the local imprint of the gospel, the working of God made visible in our own places. Through my interest in St. Cuthbert, for example, I regularly go to the places that he traversed, the peaceful hills, the holy wells, the windswept beaches. I've started to know these places intimately, not because I made a resolution to be more mindful or necessarily to spend more time in nature, but because I was drawn out by his story. And in doing so, I do rediscover silence, not as a kind of commodity to chase, not as something to be blocked into my Google Calendar, but by simply following where the stories lead. That's the trick, if you like. It becomes organic. And all of this is deeply biblical too. And St. Paul said, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Through what I attend to, through who I attend to, through the form that my days take, the possibility of encounter opens up. And I find myself in quiet places, not for their own sake, but for Christ's. Now, obviously, I can't do this every day or even every week, but that's okay. My friend Ryan and I are currently working on a documentary. We spent a whole week going through the holy sites of the north, and I had more of what I want to call wondrous encounters in those 7 days than in the previous couple of months. So what about those of you on another continent? Maybe you don't have medieval churches on every corner or ancient saints impressed into the memory of the land. Still, the Christian faith has always taught us that the world is full of God, and the newness of the new world, as we used to say, is obviously no hindrance to that. There's such treasure in your backyard, even if it's of a different kind. North America, for example, is breathtakingly beautiful. In many ways, those wild places feel closer to the old world of a more silent and less mechanized age. So if what I've been saying speaks to you, I'd encourage you to picture a saint in your landscape, to take them into your places. What's more, for my sins, this Englishman is slightly envious of how many more Christians there are in the US than in England. And let me know in the comments, but I imagine it's not too difficult to find someone to go on a kind of informal pilgrimage with. Take the story of a saint like Patrick or Cuthbert or Anthony and bring it with you on a hike or a quiet walk. Reflect on their life, their struggles, even their miracles. Make it a shared story and walk within that. And you know, there may be a criticism that I'm being overly nostalgic for a medieval past, and I want to address that. These earlier times offer something we rarely find now, a kind of archetypal clarity, a simplicity of meaning. The noise is stripped away. Their stories are cleaner, starker. They reveal spiritual truths without all of the clutter of modernity. And the communion of saints are a real presence. But if it seems nostalgic to meditate on these figures, one only needs to ask why so few stories today are set in the 2020s. Why do so many movies reach for the past or outside of history for things like myth? It's because we're starving for symbol, for meaning. And the past, especially the sacred Christian past, absolutely speaks that and will forever speak it to us. In the life of St. Cuthbert, we see stories of God's provision of food when he's out on his journeys through places like this, or caught stranded in a storm. The theme of salvation is reflected outwardly in the world around him as well, in events, in landscapes, and in animals. It was understood that the world was a kind of living scripture. Storms test virtue, birds bring bread like Elijah, and the sea itself can become a place of both trial and baptism. Every moment in nature becomes an echo of the gospel, where the material world mirrors the spiritual through pattern and symbol. And this way of seeing is open to all of us still. So that's what's worked for me, or at least is working for me. And again, I can't overlook the importance of things like prayer ropes or the Holy Rosary. And actually the Rosary is great here as we meditate daily on mysteries of the New Testament. Contrary to what the culture often says, we don't write our own story, do we? We listen. We listen for the way forward and the call of the highest good, the call which takes us out of ourselves, the call of God. It's what the prophets heard. It's what Our Lady heard at the Annunciation. We're meant to merge our lives with the true story, if you will, the one that began with the incarnation of Christ into history and the one that continues now. That ongoing union of heaven and earth, unfolding in creation and in the lives of the saints who, by God's grace, dispel the darkness, a darkness which we all know is far too real, but the one that the Christian knows will not ultimately have the final word. I just want to say it's all still here, waiting for us, and that our lives are of supreme value. So thank you for watching. If you found this video helpful, please share it around, and I'll see you on the open road.